Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Cyber PMM podcast, the only show dedicated to helping cyber PMMs fight digital chaos, cut through the hype, and do more with less. Let's dive in. Hi everyone, how are you? This is Dane, and today I'm joined by Ani Gottiparthy, who is the CEO and co-founder of Hindsight. Hindsight is a new venture that helps teams increase competitive win rates by improving their competitive positioning. And Ani and I recently met less than a month ago, right, Ani? And we connected on LinkedIn and I saw his profile and it was a tool that I thought, hey, product marketers might actually benefit from something like this. And it's also in the age of like all the AI agents that we've been discussing lately and I've been writing about. So I was like, hey, Ani, you want to come on the podcast and talk more about what you're up to and maybe share some insights both about Hindsight, and there's so much interesting stuff in your background around the Y Combinator. I hear so many things, and as an old entrepreneurship nerd, and I just love to hear more about what that process was like, and it's great to have you on.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you for having me on. Excited to chat and dig into competitive intel and product marketing, entrepreneurship, all that kind of stuff.
Cool. Yeah. Before we get there, let's talk about you a little bit. So just your profile lists some cool, like you started out, it looks like at UC Berkeley. Is that right? Maybe let's start there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was a little bit late to tech, but I think what happens to people that go to Berkeley is you're kind of surrounded by it and the bug gets you. So yeah, I studied computer science and design at Berkeley, was really always into products and design. So when I graduated, I worked as a product manager for 2 years at Logitech, where I was working on computer vision and integrating that into video conferencing and things like that. This was when COVID was happening and everyone was kind of jumping onto Zooms for everything.
I'm using a Logitech right now as my camera. So I'm sure many people are familiar.
Yeah. The Logitech Brio is a great webcam if anyone's looking. So I was working on some of the kind of like AI stuff that works behind these cameras and the ones that are in office conference rooms and things like that. So yeah, I was on the product team over there for a few years and then founded Hindsight, Y Combinator, and it's kind of been off to the races since then.
Okay, so that Y Combinator piece, was that before or after Logitech?
That was after. So me and my co-founder, Andrew, who's one of my good friends from when we were growing up, started kind of working on a little side project at the time while we were both at our previous companies. Andrew was at Google. This was when I think GPT-3 had just come out. So this is like pre-chat GPT, but still very exciting for all the nerds out there who were playing around with these models called like DaVinci, Ada, and stuff like that. So, we're playing around with that, initial set of capable language models, pitched that idea to Y Combinator, and we ended up getting in and then taking the leap and started full time.
Wow. So Y Combinator, is that like a form that you have to fill, or just imagine people that have never heard of it, how would you describe their program?
Yeah, so C has, I would say, a really interesting application process. It's all very short and to the point, so it doesn't really waste your time or their time because they're evaluating a ton of applications every cohort that they're doing. So it's a short form that you fill out. You give them like a soft pitch or a demo of like what you're working on. And if they like you or the idea enough, you'll do like a short 15-minute interview, I think, with one of the partners there where they really grill you for 15 minutes.
Uh-huh.
And that's basically it. And it's extremely short. It's very stressful, but if you make it through, then you're part of YCs, which is super helpful especially if you're a first-time founder.
And then so you get in, are you now on site in like a lab type environment, or is it still all just remote, just somehow connected in virtually?
So we were one of the first batches after COVID happened that was in person. So it's more and more in person, I think, every batch now. So there was a handful of in-person things. So, all of us relocate to SF during the batch. And there were a bunch of in-person talks, office hours and events. There are also a bunch of things that happen over Zoom, Google Meets. So at the time it was hybrid. I think now YC is like a giant kind of industrial building and dog patch in SF where they host a bunch of events. So even more stuff is in person now, which is really cool.
Yeah, because you think about all the entrepreneurs around the country that would be maybe somebody from Miami that would they have to move to the Bay Area to participate in Y Combinator? Or that's kind of where I'm going.
I'm not entirely sure what the policy is. There were certain people that were just at least during our batch that were remote, but I would say
Okay.
probably 99% of teams choose to be out there at least for lunch.
Okay.
And if anyone's considering it, I would highly recommend being there.
Cool. So exciting times. You're in YC, and then you already had the kind of nugget of an idea with your old friend, which is cool. I mean, that's super exciting, right? You're in kind of, but then the practical, like obviously every war story you hear about entrepreneurs, it's obviously a lot of hours. It's not easy. You have to wear many hats. You have to, I imagine, especially just after COVID and like all of the advancements with ChatGPT and AI entered the mix prior to your idea. Let me ask that question. Was AI factored into your initial proposal, or did that come later?
Yeah, it was. So, and, Andrew and we've always been building apps and stuff together before the idea that eventually became Hindsight. But yeah, AI was really the core part of the DNA of the founding of the company. It wasn't always for competitive intelligence, like the models weren't nearly good enough to do or able to do with Hindsight today. What we were building at the time when we went into Y Combinator was actually a tool for developers to train and hyper specialize these first versions of language models so that they would actually be useful. That quickly became mostly irrelevant for like 99% teams because the models just way better and you didn't need to do that. But that was the initial idea when we went into YC. We're always an AI company. Now we've pivoted from being more on like the infrastructure and training of these models to being applied AI in a very specific use case. In our case, competitive intelligence, building the research and agentic capabilities that we can just use state-of-the-art models and build them in a really nice kind of intuitive way for users that difficult workflows become easy. And we don't really need to do all that crazy training and infrastructure work.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking of that impact to how many business models were formed that pre-AI adoption. And then it's almost like building just before cloud was a thing, or, this is probably even more impactful. So you were prepared, in other words. It's not like you entered and were like, oh, I wish we thought of that.
Yeah.
So which is a huge advantage, right? Because you were off to a great start, a springboard, whereas maybe many others were entering that race from a standpoint of we're going to do it competitive intelligence or any product that was launched at the time from like a traditional developer's path.
Totally. It's a really good point. Something that we see all the time where, ironically, we're in a lot of competitive deals as a competitive intelligence company. Something that's really interesting is if you started too early, you're tacking AI onto a product. And,
right.
It's almost like you're trying to add a tiny layer of intelligence on top of this gigantic product that was built when you couldn't do all of the really cool stuff that AI can do. And honestly, it's an advantage for us being AI native in that sense, which is from the ground up. We're able to add in lots of levels of intelligence for the various tasks, whereas for some other tools, you can market it as, hey, now we have some AI things. So yeah, I'm glad we started with AI as kind of at the foundation. We also started, I think, at a good time.
Yeah.
Which talking about startups, I do think timing is kind of
absolutely
at the wrong time.
Right. It is everything. Timing is everything. You can have a great idea, but sometimes being first to market, you're proving it out and you're getting bloodied from battle in the market. And then the second or third entrant might come in and see and learn from that. And then the timing aspect as well is just the volume of startups right now. And, there's been relationships to the .com bubble in the early 2000s when the web was basically released for everyone to use. And we're kind of in a similar dynamic, right? Where the genie's out of the bottle with AI and tools like even I've been playing, like Replit or Bolt.new. I've never been able to code or build or anything. And I can go in there now. And true story, I had an app idea like 15 years ago and I always just wrote it off because I never studied computer science. That's something that's beyond me. And then now it's like I have this capability to go in and actually build at record time even. But I've been seeing these posts lately too. I work in cyber and in our industry, we have a tendency to kind of be more on the cynical or skeptical side because you build rapidly, yes, but are you building securely? Are all of these apps that are flooding the market now just like going to introduce all these types of like vulnerabilities from a cyber standpoint.
Right.
So I'd like maybe to ask that question to you is how are you factoring in security and maybe we can use this as a case study for the broader cyber industry to understand because, this pace of development that's racing in from AI coding, what's your view on this? How often are you considering the cyber aspect?
I mean, it's extremely important. I mean, it's one of the most important things that we think about with the types of companies that we work with. Some are in cybersecurity, some are in, very kind of regulated fields and like healthcare and things like that. So we have to bake that into really like the core of the product in terms of making sure all of those boxes are checked. We have our certifications, our pen testing and all that kind of stuff. I think for, like many things with startups, I think even that piece has gotten a lot easier thanks to, tools like Banta and like these kind of like compliance platforms that can help you if you're not a security expert, understand what you need to look for, what you really need to implement. And then obviously you can get your auditors and folks to help you understand what you need to be doing. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to AI tools, I definitely see the risk, especially if you're pumping a bunch of proprietary information into a language model. If you're not sure where that's going or whether it's being used to train a model and leaking to other folks, it can definitely be a big worry for teams. And, our job as founders and folks building AI tools is to do a good job communicating where is our model being hosted, what's our policy around, training models and using data, retaining it, encrypting it, all that kind of stuff. It's definitely possible when cloud stuff, I wasn't really working in tech at the time, but when cloud first came out, I'm sure there were a lot of similar kind of fears about like, oh, now my data is somewhere else.
Sure.
But yeah, once I think you kind of get over that hurdle and prove out, here's why it's safe, here's how we do things. I think the benefits of using it and adopting it are so huge that, the momentum's there to get you over the hump.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, and it's true with that cloud era and even till this day, a lot of organizations still won't, just for security purposes, be able to leverage cloud infrastructure. And, like there might be extreme cases like air-gapped environments in the government that just don't, can't do it. But, with the AI case, like you said, that data that's flowing at record pace into OpenAI's hands and other LLMs, wherever it's going, there's just a giant question mark as to where all this is leading, right? And it's not unlike Google was in the early 2000s, and everything got sorted out, but it's still till this day, you can see Google battling on the privacy front, right? And big tech in general, like privacy has been one of the biggest issues. It's interesting, your perspective too on the compliance aspect you mentioned a few times. It's like there's certain things you literally have to do, right?
Yeah.
Are you submitting like RFPs to compete?
We don't do RFPs yet,
okay.
But for every customer that we bring on, we're typically answering like a security questionnaire and sharing our audit reports and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I mean, it really does depend from company to company. We've come across certain industries in particular that will have extremely stringent requirements where they need like us to host a model in their cloud environment, and it's air gapped to a certain extent because they're the only people that have access to it. So yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different like ways to do it, but I think for most AI teams in your enterprise tier, you have to have that ability to kind of swap out the underlying pieces and be like, okay, the models are hosted here with you. You have complete control over what's coming in and out, and just to kind of put them at ease, even if your cloud hosted version of the product is completely safe.
You talk about models, and it's just a thing that's been intriguing to me. Again, not a developer, did not study computer science, but just extremely interested in looking at what's happening right now and the impact. But you have like Hugging Face, right? Where it's like a library of models is how I look at it. You go in huggingface.com and there's all of these openly available models that you can download. Am I looking at that right? And then you can build your own locally based on, say, Llama. I guess they put theirs there, and then you can download that. And then how does it qualify as building your own model if you're downloading somebody else's model and then tweaking it? Is that how that works when you say you're building your own model, or are you from scratch building your own? Like, and you don't have to talk about what Hindsight does, but in general?
I mean, our setup is a complete open secret, not a secret at all, actually. So, I mean, to answer your question, unless you're like a research lab and training a model, like, you're not coming up with like your own kind of like crazy AI techniques for the most part. Like, the research labs are going to be way better at that than anyone else. And that's why you have state-of-the-art models, OpenAI, all those kinds of things. When people say they're building their own model, what they're going to do is typically fine tune the model, basically like add some refinements on top of it for specific use cases. What that requires is, you get the kind of base version of a model, maybe from a place like Hugging Face, you host it in some kind of cloud environment on a bunch of GPUs, and then you're supplying your own data set, which is a fraction of the size of what the pre-training data was, but is a way to refine it a little bit for your use case. So you can it's a new model at that point. It's going to respond the same way as the base model, but it has certain characteristics, if that makes sense. There are like small pieces of our infrastructure that we kind of refine and train specifically for competitive intelligence. We're talking about reasoning and search and things like that, which we make our own tweaks to. But for the most part, we're relying on state-of-the-art models, Anthropic and those kinds of vendors.
Right. And there's no shame in building like an AI wrapper, right? And so that's what they kind of call it. And that's why you have this explosion that you do. And when AI was first released, one of the best analogies I heard, or not first released, because that's the other thing, is looking at the history. It's like the term itself is from like the 1950s or something, and it's not new by any means, right? But what's new is that it's like what before was like conceptual or future theory has become something that is now actually usable at scale, right? But if you look at like some of the comments from Microsoft's CEO, and it's like, you have almost this utility effect where it's like the aspect of building data centers and providing them with power, that's really going to be the longer term challenge. I just remembered the analogy. Sorry. It's like electricity. Everybody then gets access to electricity and it powers everything, and then it's usable. So you're using it to build this AI application for competitive intelligence. So take us through, like, what is your app doing, and how is it helping teams in product marketing where I sit, and what's that application look like?
Yeah, definitely. For most teams, it seems like competitive intel is pretty hard to do. It's really, things are out of date very quickly, and doing things like coming up with the right positioning are pretty difficult. We try and think of competitive intelligence as hierarchy, where at the bottom there's all this public data out there from competitor landing pages and doc sites, view sites, and all this stuff. There's a ton of this data, and the point of competitive intel at this bottom part of the pyramid is just to find it and filter it down to what's useful. So Hindsight, in terms of what our agents do, we do a really good job of researching competitors every day. Imagine having a competitive intelligence person team that woke up every morning and did a deep dive on every one of your competitors and pulled out all of the updates from the landing pages and their social posts and recent news and all that kind of stuff. Moving up the pyramid a little bit, there's like that second layer, which would be, what are your buyers telling you? What is your sales teams actually saying calls or in your deals? This is, lower volume than like all of the random stuff that's out there. It's probably more valuable, and it's more, I guess, like directly going to tie to your positioning and things like that. What we see for most teams is like, there's just too many gong calls and too many emails and notes in Salesforce to actually like dig through it and find all of the data and really like put a number to, the question of like, who our competitors are, people saying about us versus those competitors. So the second thing that our AI does is plug into your sales tools, tag your competitors, pull out those quotes, and understand what is happening in the field when it comes to you versus your competitors. And then to round out this terrible pyramid analogy, at the top is win-loss interviews and, primary research, which is essentially like, as a CI team, where you going out and actively procuring your own sources of insights. This is the hardest to do. It's the lowest volume. It's also something we see most teams just completely skip over if they have like a dedicated CI resource. And that's the last piece of the puzzle with Hindsight, which is, can we help teams schedule more of these interviews, conduct more of these interviews, and collect more like on the nose feedback, more unbiased feedback from, people in their market or people who work at competitive companies to understand like, what is your position?
Now, what happens is as vendors or companies get bigger, this becomes more specialized, right? So there's specialized competitive intelligence functions that actually that's what they focus on. And so as companies increase in size, you'll see people that's their title is competitive intelligence, right? So I'm sure for your ICP definition, like ideal customer profiles for Hindsight, you probably have several cases.
Yeah.
If it's a larger company, you might have a matrix with, like competitive intelligence manager at a bigger company versus you might have a PMM at a solo startup that is doing CI plus PMM plus messaging, every hat there is.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, what we really want to do is make it so every team can have an AI agent on their team that is that dedicated CI resource. Because for product marketers, if you're trying to do both, it's just like, it's too much stuff to do. You end up just kind of throwing into this. That's why the battle cards are always like 6 months out of date or whatever. And, no one's happy with that. So I think that's one of the best kind of like applications of AI is just like find those tasks that kind of get thrown to the side because everyone's too busy and find a way to make it easy for a team to do it. And, the good thing with an agent is they can kind of like do it autonomously almost and report on what they're finding. And like you said, a small team, so even a team up to, we have customers that have like 1,000 employees and no dedicated competitive intel person. It's still the product marketer who's doing it. So there really is a range of ways to do it. The goal with our agent is like, let's see what the best competitive intelligence people do, like the ones who are dedicated to it, and then replicate that and kind of automate those workflows and make so everyone can do it.
Right. And how do you prioritize knowing the customer as best as you can? Are you on the phone with customers every day, kind of understanding what the pains they're going through? Or because then, like, as a startup founder, I imagine you don't have like a massive team that you can assign and delegate things to. Maybe use agents to do stuff that as it wasn't possible yesterday for that, but I'm sure you do. But like, how do you build and grow? Right.
No, it's a really good question. We've had thousands of conversations at this point with like folks in product marketing and sales and competitive intelligence, just like understanding what is the work that needs to be done? Where is it falling short? What is the workflow? How do we help? So, it's a constant process. We learn a lot from our sales conversations and we learn a lot from our existing customers as well in terms of how are they using our tool, what they want our tool to do, those kinds of things. So it's really important for us to be really work closely with our customers and design partners and do an active job to go out and talk to folks who aren't customers, but who are in doing the jobs that we're trying to replicate and help with to understand the workflow.
So when you say sales, is that basically just you, or do you have a team?
It's just me.
Yeah, I was going to say
it's just me. Yeah. So
okay.
We're a very lean team. This won't always be the case, but for now it's, sure. Andrew and I, my co-founder, have all, supporting all of our customers as well as building the product and
doing the side. Wow. Yeah. Well, that's no small task, obviously, but I think it's, if you're smart, like you guys obviously are, you're probably employing your own agents to help you scale of the game.
We use Hindsight every day. We use ChatGPT and Claude every day as well for a bunch of different tasks. It does let you work a lot faster, keep things a lot more lean. And, in terms of how we use Hindsight, like you might not think of what I've encountered a lot with startups is like, oh, we don't really think about the competition or, competitive intel is really useful for us right now. But one of the things I've learned is that nailing your competitive positioning and what your reason for existing is super important right from the beginning. You have to have an answer for why are you here? Why are you different from competitors? And doing that can be, really hard, especially if every competitor now has an AI feature that they're tapping onto their product. So you really have to dive deep. You have to go deep and talk to people and understand what the differences are. And you have to consolidate all of that and keep it up to date. So yeah, that's hindsight is very helpful for me as I figure out, what makes us different.
With the name
on a call.
How'd you come up with the name Hindsight?
I think I have to give credit to Andrew on this one. So like I mentioned, a really big part of our product is understanding, what buyers and people in the market think about your product versus competitors. And, AI can do a really good job of, reviewing a million Gong calls and pulling out the trends for you, giving you the number behind, the trends and then also the why behind it. So, and I guess another kind of related point, competitive intelligence and web loss analysis, I think, are very closely correlated. And, I think they're almost one and the same. So that's really the inspiration behind Hindsight. We want to give teams 100% clarity into, what are buyers saying about us versus competitors? What does the data say in terms of why we win, why we lose? How do we use those really clear insights to power our positioning and move from, I call it vibe-based positioning, because this is what we used to do at Logitech, where you just have a couple of people in a room and you come up with a guess of what might work. Like, hey, maybe let's try saying it this way. Maybe these are the two things we focus on. You don't really have the data to tell you like, hey, 75% of our deals against this competitor, we win because of these two reasons. You don't really have that data unless you're, using a tool like Hindsight or something else. We want to move from that vibe-based kind of positioning to a data-driven approach. And yeah, the idea of Hindsight is, let's make the Hindsight 2020. Let's give you that data in a really clear way so that when you are building a battle card or, your positioning, you have the data to back it up.
Nice. And I just opened your website here. By the way, it looks like hindsight.com is open. I don't know if you know that. I mean, not open.
When we raise a round, we'll pay for
Is that expensive?
It's not super expensive, but no, it's probably not that bad.
Yeah. But when you're starting up, it's a wise decision that shows that you guys are starting in the right mindset. But yeah, no, I think your just somebody that looks at messaging daily, one thing that stands out to me is you're not talking about how great Hindsight is and making yourself the hero of the story, which is common, right? A lot of companies will do that. And so it looks like you've put it more in terms of value for potential or prospective users, win more deals against competitors. I see you went with as your main headline. How did you arrive at that?
So when we work with customers, that's the main thing that we're tracking. So obviously we do a bunch of analytics when you get into the platform to understand how often you're seeing your competitors in deals, what's your win rate against those competitors. We create like a really good data set off the rip to kind of tell you where you're starting. Most of our customers will come to us because, they're seeing more of certain competitors, or they want to, maybe their win rate against certain competitors is to be. So what we do is we go through the process of a pilot and rolling things out and, creating battle cards and things like that, is one, tracking how often those resources get used and what's the impact on win rate against those competitors. So competitive win rate is the really big one for us. With the right positioning, with your sales team on the message, and using a message that's like backed by the data that tells you that message works, we see that competitor win rates increase. It's not rocket science. If you have a good message and people are using it correctly.
How do you tie a win to a message?
Obviously, that's, there's a little bit of correlation that we have to do in that case. So what we know is, when does a seller use a battle card in a particular deal? What's the win rate when the battle card is used? What's the if it's not used? We also know what messaging they're using in that call because our AI is reviewing those calls. So we can kind of combine those data points together to tell you what is your win rate when you're using, messaging powered by Hindsight, and what's your win rate.
The calls are
kind of base case.
How are the calls logged and recorded? Is that with Gong, or is that something you're doing?
Typically Gong. So for most of our customers, it's Gong. We're working on building more integrations. There's thousands of call recording softwares out there today. So we're working on building more of those integrations. But our main data sources are going to be the CRM, like Salesforce and HubSpot, and then call recorders like Gong. And yeah, our AI will automatically kind of pull those in, analyze them, and understand who the competitors were, what are the decision drivers, and give you the what is happening and the why.
Very cool. And I also see, so you have down here one platform impact across teams, and then you've had your segmentation across product marketing, sales and rev ops, VI and product, which is, it's definitely for somebody that would be new to your site, getting to that point and seeing that customization, I think would be a plus as well. So
that competitive intel, like positioning stuff, is helpful for everybody. I was a product manager, and, you're trying to figure out, how did we build something that people buy when they have so many options? A buyer has a hard job. Everything looks pretty similar to them, and you have to have a good message that makes it easy for them to make a choice. You want to know what they care about, what's resonating with them. So for a product person, there's like definitely a value prop for knowing, what is our position technically and in our messaging, at least. For sales, obviously, they're obsessed with their numbers and they want to be winning deals. So if you can make it easy for them to do that, take the guesswork out of it, be happy as well.
Sure.
Hopefully product marketing and CI is kind of self. Right.
Out of curiosity, did you guys build your own website as well, like as founders, or do you work with like an agency or?
Yeah, built by us, built by me.
Well, you've done from A to Z. You guys are.
that is life as a startup when you're and you have to keep things lean. A lot of stuff done in house. Hopefully, at some point we'll be able to, spend the big bucks and get a really fancy website. But hopefully it does the job.
Yeah, no, I think it does. And, you have to keep your eye out on that domain name for sure. And just make sure your competitors don't squat on that while you're waiting for the capital, I guess. But, no, so speaking of that, so what's your next step? Like, how do, I think maybe we can close out by just going over what's your future, where are you headed with all this?
Yeah, our goal is to build the smartest, easiest to use competitive intelligence tool. Like I mentioned, we are building an agent that can live in every team and be that dedicated CI person that has the answers and creates your battle cards and keeps them paid and can do all of the hard stuff that a lot of teams just don't have the resources to do. So obviously tons of stuff that we're doing on the product front just to make that happen. I think we're well on our way. Like, we're starting to gain traction with bigger companies, see the vision start to come to life. So yeah, in terms of what's next for us, we're going to keep building, making our product better, making it smarter. The goal for us is to, find 100 companies that really, really love us and can sing about us to their friends. So yeah, that's what's next for us. We're just building and selling.
Love that. Yeah. And still connected to YC, or was that just like a on-ramp type thing?
So we raise money from them essentially when we get into YC. So they are I guess on our cap table, and they help us with advice, things like that. And we're definitely part of the YC community.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's definitely a relationship that goes beyond just a batch. It's super helpful.
Cool. And I always ask, whenever I do these interviews, if you have any requests of the audience, like, do you want them to check anything out? Can they find you and chat with you? How does, what's your recommendation there?
Yeah. All of that would be awesome. If you're like a product marketer or a salesperson, or honestly anyone that is repeatedly checking a competitor's landing page or taking through their documentation, I think Hindsight could be, pretty helpful if you're not already using AI for all of your CI stuff. I think it's kind of no-brainer to automate it and make it better. So yeah, you can find us and start you can self-serve a trial of our products. Just go to usehindsight.com and you can sign up and go through a free trial there, or, reach out to me, find me on LinkedIn. I'm Ani Gottiparthy. Yeah, I would be happy to chat and, walk you through what Hindsight looks like when it's, fully deployed.
Awesome. Well, Ani, this conversation has been awesome, and again, just the combination of the product marketer relationship, the entrepreneur factor, the startup mode, the AI aspect, and what's going on. The mixture of all these things is fascinating, and really appreciate you shedding light onto this subject. And I hope to talk to you again at some point after you get all types of funding and capital, and you guys are a $10 billion company, and that'll be exciting.
It all started here, man. Yeah. I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the conversation. It was super fun.
All right, Ani, thanks. Well, that does it for this episode of the Cyber PMM podcast. If you found this episode valuable, please subscribe, leave a comment or review, and let's connect on LinkedIn. Be sure to check out cyberpmm.com for more resources. And you can also subscribe to the Cyber PMM newsletter on Substack and LinkedIn to keep up to speed with everything you need to fight digital chaos, cut through the hype, and do more with less. See you next time.